60-second Disney movie reviews, and it's time to cover Disney's first CGI animated film, Dinosaur. Dinosaur was Disney's first attempt to do a photorealistic, entirely CGI animated film. Critics at the time praised the CGI animation for its innovative style, but they panned its generic and flimsy script. So how does it hold up 20 years down the line? Well, it doesn't. This animation that was so innovative for its time just looks dated and clunky today. Some shots hold up, but on the whole it doesn't. And unfortunately, that's kind of the fate of CGI animation like this. Unlike movies like Snow White or Fantasia that are timeless, this one has a very short shelf life. Now, that could have been forgiven if it had a better story and better characters, but unfortunately it doesn't. The script is generic and the characters are unfortunately bland. There is some impressive atmospheric work in this movie, and I appreciate that it's one of the few Disney films that actually advocates for the elderly and the disabled. But at the end of the day, Dinosaur kind of just made itself go, well, extinct. 60-second Disney movie reviews, and it's time to pull the lever for The Emperor's New Groove. So The Emperor's New Groove was originally a movie called Kingdom of the Sun. It was going to be a more grand and epic story set in the Incan Empire, and the directors of The Lion King were going to be heading the project. But there was a lot of behind-the-scenes turmoil, and the director straight up quit midway through the production. So The Emperor's New Groove was basically a scrape together to try to get a comedy out, just to get something out. And it's honestly kind of shocking how well this one ended up working. Now, I'm not in love with this movie to the extent that a lot of people in this generation are. Doing a lower stakes comedy is definitely a shell of what it could have been, but for a Disney buddy comedy movie, this movie succeeds in what it set out to do. Yzma is easily the best and funniest character in this movie. We did not deserve the glory that is Eartha Kitt. And though not all of the jokes land, most of them do. It's a funny movie, and the fact that this movie kind of got a second wind from modern internet meme culture is a really interesting phenomenon. This movie honestly feels ahead of its time and perfect for this current generation. 60-second Disney movie reviews, and it's time to go on a voyage for Atlantis, the Lost Empire. Atlantis knows that a lot of people nowadays are pretty nostalgic for, but unfortunately I'm not here for you guys, I'm sorry. Atlantis has some really innovative ideas that I think would be really useful for like a TV show, but as a film it just doesn't work. The movie barrels through Act 1 at a breakneck pace, then finally slows down a bit for Act 2, but then immediately just starts racing again through Act 3. They had an ambitious amount of content to try to cram into this film, and honestly it just feels oversaturated and like none of it's able to land because of it. The twist in Act 3, where the entire supporting cast betrays the main character, feels forced and out of place. And then when they immediately change sides again, it just doesn't feel earned. And to be honest, most of the conflict in Act 3 feels very contrived and leads to an ending that's kind of just meh. I think in a better movie or TV show, these characters could have been really compelling and interesting. But ultimately the storytelling is inept and the movie is trite at the worst of times. 60-second Disney movie reviews, and it's time to find our Ohana with Lilo and Stitch. During the early 2000s, Disney was largely losing faith in traditional animation, with Pixar and DreamWorks CGI animation trouncing them at the box office. As a result, director Chris Sanders got uncharacteristic creative freedom with this film, and the result was Disney's last really successful hand-drawn animated film. And deservedly so, Lilo and Stitch is a pretty dang good movie. It's definitely an oddball for sure. I think one of the strongest appeals to the film is that it focuses on sibling relationships before that was really a gimmick that Disney was relying on. Not only are they very genuine characters with a very genuine feeling relationship, but they also have a very heartbreakingly real situation that they're dealing with. And this film handles it in a very mature way. The stuff with Stitch and the aliens is really cool too. I think it works best when it leans into the weird and unusual stuff. Sometimes it does kind of feel like two different stories that have been, stitched together, but I feel like that was kind of the point they were going for. It's about how two very different stories can have the same emotional truth and be a part of one big Ohana. 60-second Disney movie reviews, and it's time to rattle the stars with Treasure Planet. Treasure Planet was the passion project of directors Musker and Clements that they were trying to get off the ground for as far back as The Little Mermaid. And after years of telling them no, after the success of their movie Hercules, Disney finally let them make Treasure Planet. And the result is one of the greatest underrated Disney movies of all time. Every single element of Treasure Planet for me is just magical. I love the way that they take traditional pirate imagery as well as space age imagery and combine them together in a way that could only exist within the imagination. And that's really characteristic of this entire movie too. It is so imaginative. Jim Hawkins is one of my favorite Disney main characters, probably the best, and his dynamic with the villain John Silver is one of the most interesting relationships in all of Disney as well. And I think it is one of the most relatable coming-of-age stories in Disney. It was not a financial success because Disney sabotaged it on release in order to justify phasing out hand-drawn animation, but like Jim, this movie has the makings of greatness in it, and it's always worth a watch. 60-second Disney movie reviews, and it's time to take a look through my eyes with Brother Bear. Brother Bear is a true mixed bag of a movie. There's a lot about it that's genuinely good and genuinely works, and a lot about it that genuinely does not. This movie tells a very emotional story about having empathy for nature, and I think it does it in a really powerful way in that Kenai inadvertently is responsible for Koda's mother's death and comes to realize that as the movie goes on. That's great, that's powerful. But unfortunately, none of the characters in this movie really have the weight to carry that plot. Kenai's generic and kind of flat, and Koda's annoying. So it's hard to get invested in their dynamic, even though it is well written. The comic relief in this movie is gratuitous. The emotional sides of the story are constantly being by these comic relief characters who are just out of place and annoying. And though I thought Phil Collins' music worked really well in Tarzan, here it doesn't really. Especially in the scene where Kenai is confessing what he did to Koda, it takes you out of and weakens a critical moment of the film. That said, I do really love the animation and the landscapes. 60-second Disney movie reviews, and don't have a cow, but we're about to do Home on the Range. Home on the Range was the last traditionally animated Disney movie before they switched over to doing predominantly CGI film. To date, Disney would only really ever make 2 others. And Home on the Range was a sour note to go out on. Now, I do think this movie kind of gets overhated because at worst it's just passably boring and annoying, but it's just not very good. They definitely aimed more for a little kid-oriented audience with this one, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it is definitely not in line with the Disney ethos up until this point. There's really not a lot here for an older audience, and though it sells itself on its humor, that humor mostly falls flat. The villain of this movie, Alameda Slim, is the only element that I really kind of like about this movie. He has a fun personality and a creative concept, though I don't think they really use him very well in the film. Roseanne Barr as Maggie is especially gratuitous. Disney was trying to recreate the magic of Robin Williams as the genie and had to scrape the bottom of the barrel to get it this time. Definitely not recommended.